It's a reflection of sometimes how horrible human beings can be towards each other. If any of them stepped out of line or misbehaved or did something that he didn't want them to do, he would refer them to this machine that he had created called Jackie. And he would say that Jackie would cause some disaster around the world, which would be as a direct result of them not doing as they were told. I mean, born in North London, but very quickly moved out to the Shire. So I grew up in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire. Me, mum, sister, stepdad. My dad died when I was quite young. I was 3. He was a police officer in the Met and he died of cancer. So sort of my mum was left as a widow with a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old. It's pretty tough on her, but the support we got from the Met Police and my dad's former colleagues was amazing, and I think that is probably the sort of the foundation for my my ultimate career choice, which was working with the Met Police. I effectively joined the police 20 years after he passed away, and I ended up at the same police station he'd started at Hornsey in North London, and there were still people that remembered my dad. So that was quite nice to have that connection. 1998, I went to Tottenham as a trainee detective. I was there for 3-4 years. It was great being a Tottenham fan, and obviously I'm looking for sympathy at this point as well. It was great to work on the patch. Actually get to watch quite a few of the games as well, because I'd volunteer to work the football games, so I could get to see the Spurs as well. Having sort of learnt my trade at Tottenham, which is for anyone that knows Tottenham in North London, busy area. Very diverse, really good place to cut your teeth. I found myself then sort of becoming a fully fledged detective and ending up on the Child Abuse Investigation Command as an informant handler.
And what was that like?
Quite interesting, challenging, I think, both sort of, from a professional point of view and mentally. So the majority of my informants were sex offenders. So it was sort of managing and almost getting used to sort of putting into compartments your personal and professional life and in some ways, and without wishing to sound harsh, but, knowing that these predominantly men, in fact, literally exclusively men, had seriously abused children, but for whatever reason wanted to provide information. And it's, you're putting that sort of partition of not thinking about what they'd done. And that isn't because we didn't care, but, at the end of the day, needed to build a relationship to ensure that they felt comfortable in disclosing things to us. So that was, a real steep learning curve in terms of that interaction and putting your personal feelings to one side as well. When my daughter Evie came along, I couldn't do that. No matter how much I tried to, I couldn't carry on doing that job working with sex offenders. It was time to move on, and I found myself on one of the Met's sort of central proactive teams, so involved in covert surveillance, looking at organised crime groups for, a significant amount of time, following their every move. Unbelievable, took a lot of work, but ended up with some really, really good results.
And why did you want to work in the kidnap and ransom department?
So whilst I was doing on the covert teams, we would quite often get called in to support a kidnap, just because. Just to sort of set the scene as what I'm talking about kidnaps. So these are where a hostage is being held, a ransom has been made, the hostage's family or whoever has been concerned and contacted police. I mean, obviously I would say there are far more kidnaps that go on in London that the police do not find out about, but the ones that do, then there is a real rapid response to those kidnaps, which is amazing. A lot of asset in a very short period of time can be drawn together, so hostage negotiators, surveillance teams, arms support, as well as the kidnap unit that I was on, and we would do everything that we can to locate the hostage and recover them safely. So real fast time, high risk investigations. And most kidnaps in London, in the UK, on average, run for about 12 hours. You know, for even as a kidnapper, they're high risk. Trying to control and sort of hold someone that doesn't want to be held is really hard work. And so, you know, as such, they don't last that long. But you know, I've seen £50 drug debts result in significant harm and injury to a hostage. So sometimes there's no parallel. It's not. I think you know, that scenario of a child being kidnapped and £1 million ransom being made, yeah, it happens, but very, very rarely. Very, very rarely. Most of these can often be for a few £100s over a drug debt or some sort of element of criminality that's gone wrong. They are the ones, but quite often, you know, the lower the amount of money, the higher risk of harm there is to the hostage.
Why did you move over to kind of working on human trafficking?
So totally by accident. This would never have been a career choice, which is quite bizarre, bearing in mind the last 11 years of my life. So at the time, the Met were looking at their specialist resources. They were amalgamating different sort of areas. And through that amalgamation process, one of my bosses decided that they should look at merging the human trafficking unit and my kidnap unit, because in their view, they were similar crimes, which they are absolutely not. If you take a kidnap, it is often as a result of someone that does not want to be taken, does not want to be held, where the human trafficking, and there, as I say, 12 hours, quite often that kidnap will be over. But modern slavery, human trafficking is all about conditioning someone so actually they don't leave because they feel that they can't, and they go on for weeks, months, years, you know, of people in that exploitative situation. So you could say there are some sort of very sort of broad similarities, but the reality is they're distinctly different crimes in terms of how they play out, who the victims are, you know, why certain people are selected.
Yeah, how do you even begin to start investigating human trafficking?
Traditionally, people would come in and report that things had happened to them, so there was a crime report, reactive investigation. We'd also get intelligence that would come in indicating that certain individuals were exploiting others, and that would result in a covert, proactive operation similar to the type of investigation that I would have carried out if it was drugs and guns. It absolutely happens to UK citizens. 2023, the last lot of complete yearly data showed that 25% of people that were potential victims of modern slavery or human trafficking were UK nationals. But it also, we see people that are brought in from abroad. The second highest is from Albania, third highest from Vietnam. So it's an international crime as well. And often we would receive tip-offs or information from colleagues abroad, and then we would quite often carry out joint investigations as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about the case that you worked on uncovering a cult in South London?
Yes, so at the time that the units were amalgamated, the human trafficking unit that came sort of amalgamated with us had picked up an investigation which was covered internationally, which involved a Maoist cult and a guy called Balakrishna, who had been running a home under sort of cult circumstances in Brixton, and a number of women that he had recruited over the years, and at the point that the police became involved in the case, he also had a daughter through one of the members of his cult as well, who had very little contact with the outside world. And what was quite fascinating around Balakrishna, and the bit that always sticks in my mind, is that he created a machine, and it was his way of controlling the women within the cult. And if any of them stepped out of line or misbehaved or did something that he didn't want them to do, he would refer them to this machine that he had created called Jackie. And he would say that Jackie would cause some disaster around the world, which would be as a direct result of them not doing as they were told. So absolutely bizarre and quite unbelievable that you know, intelligent individuals would believe such a thing, but it just demonstrates the impact of constant conditioning of an individual, of how you can actually convince them that some quite unbelievable things to you and me were actually like reality.
And how long had that cult been working and operating?
So we think that had probably been in some existence or form since the late 1970s. And I believe that his daughter was in her 20s when we intervened, which would have been around about 2014.
And what were the accounts of the people that had been living in that house and kind of the survivors of this crime? What were they like?
So, it was a mix. Some recognised the situation that they had been in, so they were able to provide statements. There was sort of one member that was sort of still very, very supportive of Balakrishna. So, to a point where they were sticking up for him, as in sort of trying to say he'd done nothing wrong. So, it just demonstrates over that period of time how you can sort of change someone's thought process and belief. Many survivors feel that they can't leave the people that exploit them because what's happening outside, that unknown, is so scary. It's better to sort of almost stick with the devil that you know, I guess, is probably the best way of describing it. If you look at any victim or survivor of modern slavery and human trafficking, they will have some vulnerability about them. There will be something about their story that makes them vulnerable to exploitation. And it could be, something that's happened to them personally. It could be their financial situation. It could absolutely be the fact that they are just the family that they are born into or the community that they come from. That will make them more vulnerable to exploitation than someone else. So there will be something about them. There will be some vulnerability that the perpetrators then prey on. And as a result of that, and certainly, a lot of work that I did in my time in the Met was connected with the Romanian Roma community. And, if you look at that community specifically, very marginalised within Romania and most of Eastern Europe where there's Roma Gypsy communities. So they are very insular. So the likelihood of anyone in that group reaching out for support from the police or from the government is probably relatively low because they are treated, because of the way that they're treated.
Can you tell me a little bit about the case that you worked on, which was around a Romanian sex ring?
A woman from Romania, but not Roma, had walked into Islington police station to say that she had met a guy online, they got chatting, she'd, I think, recently gone through a divorce and was looking for a new start. And he said, well, why not come to the UK? I can find you a job. And it will give you a real opportunity to start again. And I think the job was something around either waitressing or something similar to that. So obviously, her situation, probably an ideal opportunity to actually make a clean break. So came to the UK, and within a very short period of meeting with this guy, she found herself working on the streets as a sex worker, forced into that because the job didn't exist. The only way that she could sort of survive and have a roof over her head is if she did what this man had asked. So she took that risk of finding something that sounded like an opportunity for a new life. But quite quickly that was turned into a scenario where she was being forced to have sex with men. The next threat will be, well, if you leave, we'll be telling your family that you've come to the UK to work as a sex worker. So playing on that shame and that worry about what family members will think, she ended up staying in that situation. But it was so horrendous that after 2 weeks, she had the confidence to walk into a police station and report what had happened to her. And that was the start of the investigation. So my team then started looking at that individual, identified that he worked with a couple, husband or boyfriend, girlfriend. And quite quickly, we identified that this had been going on over a significant period of time. They would have a flat that they would control the women from. So banks and banks of telephones, with numbers on the back, and they were the numbers that were advertised for sexual services, either like in the traditional adverts in telephone boxes that we don't see so much now, or on adult service websites. But they were effectively controlling the bookings, so you don't actually need to be hands-on watching the woman, watching your victim day in, day night, like, sort of what is quite often presented in TV dramas of these women locked away. It's far more nuanced or subtle than that. This is like knowing how much they're earning through sex work, demanding that money so that they're not skimming you for the money that you're arranged, charging them significant booking fees. So it's a way of controlling someone without necessarily being hands-on. And most of the women that were working for them were from the Roma community, from the village that they were originally from. So there was that connection.
Am I right in thinking that he also had recruited members of his own family to work in the sex ring?
Yeah, so as the investigation went on, we identified, and actually when we started sort of going into the premises that they were using as brothels, we found a 16-year-old girl who turned out to be one of the major ringleaders' niece, and he'd recruited her at the age of 14. So he brought her from the UK, from Romania to the UK at the age of 14 for the purpose of forcing her into sex work.
How often does sex work and sexual exploitation, I suppose, come into human trafficking in your experience?
So, yeah, I mean, sex work, commercial sex exploitation, quite often. I think if you look back over my time in this, it was probably the main focus in about 2014. If you talk about human trafficking, I think most people would think it involved sex exploitation and the exploitation of foreign national women. That was the predominant sort of focus of most of my investigations. But, modern slavery and human trafficking under that umbrella as well is much wider. So we've seen significant increase in forced labour allegations. So both for legitimate scenarios like people working on construction sites. Recent case also involved men that have been working in commercial bakers in North London. So legitimate work, but sort of indirectly exploited through someone else controlling their wages, sort of giving them a home but charging them significant rent, etc. Domestic servitude is sort of another big issue that sort of falls under that umbrella, and they were probably the main three. As our understandings evolved and how we now recognise that people can be manipulated into carrying out crimes as well, criminal exploitation is probably one of the most significant crime types that we see under that modern slavery umbrella, particularly involving children and young people in running drugs. Well, I think we call, from a UK perspective, we call it county lines, but moving drugs from on behalf of inner city gangs to the shires, to towns, villages. Organ harvesting. So a couple of years ago, we had our first organ harvesting case where a Nigerian politician living in the UK recruited a street vendor and brought him to the UK because the politician's daughter required an organ because she was seriously ill. It's a real diverse sort of crime that not just in terms of how it's carried out, but almost how people are controlled and manipulated to staying in quite horrendous conditions in many instances and not seeking to tell the authorities or seek help.
And you worked on a quite extreme case of domestic servitude. Can you tell me about that case, please? Yeah, so I mean, this is probably one of the few cases that really stick in my mind, and this was again another case that I inherited during the amalgamation, which involved a guy who at the time was 40. But at the age of 14, he'd been living in Nigeria with mum and family members with siblings. Mum was really struggling to look after all the kids, and he'd got himself a job for a couple as a houseboy in Nigeria. When they were moving abroad from Nigeria, they approached mum and said, "Look, we'd like to take your son with us."
We will make sure that he receives an education. He will have a really good start in life, and we will look after him for you. You can understand in that situation why mum gave her blessing. But the reality was that guy then spent the next 26 years living in domestic servitude, caring for the family, keeping the family home clean, bringing up their 2 children as well. And at the same time, his life consisted of, in fact, his life, 26 years of life, was contained within 2 carrier bags. He had a foam mattress. He slept in the hallway. So he had a foam mattress that was under the stairs. When the family went to bed, he got the mattress out. He slept on that. Before they got up, he would fold it up and put it away and prepare breakfast for the family. That was his life. When it came to the point where he actually left that situation, the family had gone back to Nigeria for Christmas. But when they left, they put a webcam up in the hallway and said to him, we will still be able to watch you. So, we'll make sure that we want to see that you're working. You shouldn't be doing anything that you're not doing. You shouldn't be going out unless that we know you're going out. So there was still, even all those thousands of miles, they were still able to control his life.
How did you get involved to help him?
So, it's quite a sad story, really, because he had, on at least 2 occasions, tried to seek help. So he'd gone into a local police station to try and explain what had happened to him. But I think he ended up with a slip to show that he'd reported his travel documents lost. And obviously what we don't know is whether that was through miscommunication, etc., because English wasn't his first language. He'd actually taught himself English through using it with his small group of friends, and also one of his very few possessions was a radio, and they used to listen to Radio 4 on a regular basis. And just through that process, he'd effectively self-taught himself English. And it was, I think, with the support of his friends, and weirdly enough, going back to the Maoist cult case that I mentioned before, that was covered in a Radio 4 documentary, and he recognised similarities in his own life to the story that was being portrayed in that show, and that, I think, then gave him the confidence with his friends to reach out to a charity to seek help. And then the charity then involved my team, who arranged for him to be removed. But again, family wasn't there at the time. My team walked in, sat down in the lounge, asked him to come in and explain what had happened, and he couldn't bring himself to walk into the lounge because he was only ever allowed in there to clean or to look after the children. So, psychologically, through all that years of conditioning and controlling, had really, really left a mark on him. The 2 main investigators kept a really close relationship with him throughout the trial. And, it was 2 trials, unfortunately. First trial collapsed. Second one was completed, and the couple were convicted.
How much time did they get?
Only 6 years, 6 years each.
And you said that case had kind of the biggest, or one of the biggest, emotional impacts on you. Why and how did it make you feel when you were able to say you'd kind of brought that man into a space where he was free?
So I guess it's for many reasons. I guess one is because it's sometimes it's a reflection of sometimes how horrible human beings can be towards each other, and that is that he'd been robbed of his whole adult life. He had no choice or control from the age of 14 onwards without someone else telling him what he can and can't do. And that, I think that's probably the main thing. And I guess the other bit is it just demonstrates how hidden this crime can be.
As an individual, you've seen pretty awful sides and dark corners of humanity. How has doing this work against human trafficking kind of affected you in that sense? What's it made you feel about people? The
reality is that there are always those success stories that, you sort of pin your enthusiasm and drive on. And, I retired from the police 5 years ago, and through that network of NGOs and charities, I I was lucky enough to be asked to sort of work alongside some of those charities. And as a result of that, I still see the goods that can come out of horrendous situations. You know, people recovering that opportunity to move on with their lives. You know, I work with some great people that have not only had the opportunity to change the course of their life, but have also decided to use that change to make a difference for others in similar situations. And I guess it's sort of, that's my drive. That's why I'm still here, even though I should be retired. I'm still here working.
Some guys came out of the van and they put this thing over my head. It was a black thing, but I don't know what it was. It's like a hood, like a sack per se. I didn't have time. It was just such a quick movement that I didn't have time to process it.